Following the success of the NES, the late but great Gunpei Yokoi decided to pitch an idea to the company about making a handheld device with interchangeable cartridges. The codename for it would be the Dot Matrix game, since it was going to be using a dot matrix display, until eventually landing on the name GameBoy, as sort of a play on Sony's Walkman. The Game Boy would get released in April of 1989 in Japan, and in other countries later that year. This handheld would end up becoming one of the best-selling game devices ever, with over 118 million units shipped worldwide. It should also be noted that one of the launch titles for the Game Boy was Tetris, with this version of Tetris selling 35 million copies. How insane. Growing up, I never had the original brick Game Boy model, mainly since I grew up with a silver Game Boy Advance SP, but the earliest model I did have was a teal Game Boy Color, and a copy of Pokemon Yellow, both of which weren't originally mine. Yeah, I have no clue why, but like 20 or so years earlier, there was a family gathering going on at my parents' house, and some random kid showed up with a Game Boy Color and was playing Pokemon Yellow. I don't know why, but the next day, I discovered that this random kid's Game Boy and copy of Pokemon were just left behind, and he never came back to get it. So I guess it's mine forever now. Apologies to that kid wherever he is and if he's even watching. I also want to apologize for deleting his Pokemon save file a long ass time ago. But getting back to the Game Boy itself, it was decided from the beginning that a Mario game would have to launch with it. However, with Miyamoto being occupied with other projects at the time, this first Mario Game Boy title would famously be made without any input from Miyamoto at all. Produced by Gunpei Yokoi, Super Mario Land would end up getting released on the same day as the system. When it comes to my own experience, I never actually played Mario Land 1 until this video, but I have been aware of this game and how weird it is compared to other Mario games. The most nostalgic attachment I have for this game isn't really from playing it, but it's actually from a series of Newground animations from 2005 and 2006. Going back to them nowadays, they're just complete nonsense, but these kind of shorts were stuff that you just needed to be there to get. Like yeah, they're random and weird, but that was kind of the appeal.
Hey, if I saw myself in clothes like those, I'd have to kick my own ass.
If anything, this old Newgrounds series actually introduced me to my favorite band ever, System of a Down. And unrelated to Mario Land, but I remember another Newgrounds short based on Mario that was called Dumbass Mario, which also helped introduce me to yet another System of a Down song. Both the Super Mario Land series and Dumbass Mario were made by Bigfoot3290, or Jeremy Sims. So I guess I have him to thank for introducing me to my favorite band of all time. Thank you, Mario. Anyways, not only was Gunpei Yokoi producing Super Mario Land, but the game director was Satoru Okada, the composer was Hirokazu Tanaka instead of Koji Kondo, and one of the designers was Hirofumi Matsuoka. I definitely just butchered their names. Each of these figures at Nintendo had actually all previously worked together on a different game. What game was it? Well, it was a little NES title that was called yeah, basically Land 1 is a Mario game that was handled by the Metroid team, which actually explains a lot looking back at it. The plot of Super Mario Land involves Mario traveling to a new location called Sarasa Land, which has been taken over by an alien named Tatanga. So it's up to Mario to save the land and rescue Princess Peach, Daisy. Yeah, this was Princess Daisy's first ever appearance, and I always found that a little strange. Like, why didn't they just use Peach? Daisy serves the exact same purpose here. Regardless, she's a fan favorite character, and we can all thank Super Mario Land 1 for introducing her. Super Mario Land is a pretty solid rendition of the 2D Mario gameplay, though Mario's controls can take some getting used to. He can run like normal, but his acceleration in this game can be a bit wonky, meaning he can go from 0 to 100 really quick. It can be a little awkward to handle, especially when jumping, but it's not super difficult to adapt to. When it comes to the power-ups, the mushroom is obviously back, and there is a fire flower power-up, but now it's the Super Ball flower, a slight alteration to the power power-up that they had to do due to the limitations of the Game Boy graphics. A similar change would happen with the 1-ups. Since the original Game Boy couldn't display multiple colors at the time, they decided to change the 1-ups to hearts in order to differentiate it from the mushroom. This game looks pretty decent for a Game Boy launch title, and there's a certain charm to the overall style. Mario's sprite is just adorable. It's so puny looking even when you get a mushroom. The enemies are also weird looking, but while they look super similar to the original enemies in the other games, they're actually meant to be different characters. The Goombas are Goombos, the Koopa Troopas are now Bombshell Koopas, mainly because you can't kick their shells anymore. Instead, they just blow up after you jump on them. And even the Bullet Bills are referred to as Biff for some reason.
What are you looking at, butthead?
In fact, the only returning enemy that isn't different at all is the Piranha Plant. They're practically the exact same. There are other enemies that only appear in specific worlds, and I'll be sure to mention them whenever I look at the levels, which won't take too long because this game is insanely short. Seriously, there's only 4 worlds and 3 levels each. That is stupid short for a Mario game. But seeing how this was planned to be a Game Boy launch title from the start, it's not too shocking that the developers probably didn't have enough time to make more levels. While this game was made with the monochrome Game Boy screen in mind, this is one of the many Game Boy titles that actually did have some code in it for potential colors. This can be shown off when playing the game on the Game Boy Color, the Super Game Boy cartridge for Super Nintendo, or even on the Game Boy Player for GameCube, which is what I used to record footage. So I guess this technically makes this the first Mario review where I looked at a game on original hardware. Kinda. The color palette looks neat, albeit not super perfect. There's definitely an appeal to the original monochrome palette the game was released with, but the Game Boy Color schemes aren't too bad. What is probably my most favorite part of Super Mario Land is definitely the music. While it's not Koji Kondo, Hirokazu Tanaka did an excellent job with this soundtrack. I'd even go as far to say I think it's slightly better than the NES game soundtracks. For such a short game, the music is catchy, memorable, and most importantly, it's pretty damn different to what Koji Kondo would do. So yeah, the Metroid composer kinda fucking nailed the soundtrack for a Mario game. And the Underground theme would famously get a really kick-ass remix in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Like, that remix goes so hard for no reason. I also want to make a quick mention of this, but in promotion for this game, a group called the Ambassadors of Funk decided to do a pop remix called Super Mario Land back in the 90s. They even shot a music video for the song at Chessington World of Adventures in London. This is easily one of the goofiest things I've ever listened to and watched in my entire life. Please go check this shit out because you will never forget it. The song's even on Spotify too, like what the fuck?
There ain't no place like Super Mario Land.
One last thing I'll mention about the soundtrack relates to the Starman theme. It's a returning power-up too, but for some weird-ass reason, instead of using the traditional Starman theme, this game's Starman theme uses a rendition of the Can-Can? Such a weird change. Guess now what you look at all this game's worlds, and like I said, there's only 4. World 1 is Birabuto Kingdom, and it's a desert-themed world. Interesting choice to start out with. It's a pretty standard opening world, not a whole lot to really mention. Some of the unique enemies here are the flies, which kinda remind me of the ones from the Mario Bros. Arcade game, and these guys called Bun Buns, who you mainly encounter in level 2. Most of the time when you reach the end of a level, there's usually 2 exits, one at the top and one at the bottom. The bottom one is a normal exit, but if you're able to get to the top exit, you can play a quick bonus game to earn 1-ups or a power-up. It's pretty fun. Level 3 takes place inside of a pyramid, and at the very end, Mario has to fight some Sphinx-looking boss, who can be defeated in a similar fashion to Bowser in the first game. All the worlds have unique bosses and they're usually pretty easy. Oh yeah, when you beat a boss, instead of getting a version of "Our princess is in another castle," we instead get a cutscene of a fake Daisy just morphing into an enemy right in front of Mario. Oh, Daisy indeed. World 2, Muda Kingdom. The most common enemy for this world are killer seahorses that are just flying around and shooting at Mario. There's also these weird Mechabon enemies who can get the top of their heads crushed, and then they just bounce out of the level as a result. They're pretty weird. Level 3 is where we experience a new type of level. This one has Mario inside of a submarine shooting at enemies. I really like this level. It's a lot of fun. It's also great for collecting a ton of coins and earning 1-ups. Plus, this means the boss fight is going to be a shoot 'em up too. And it's with a giant seahorse shooting at Mario. It's a fun fight, but good lord, why does the boss sound like it's making sheep noises when you're shooting at it? World 3, Eastern Kingdom. This world has a bunch of Easter Island heads everywhere, and there's even these freaky fast-moving Easter Island heads that you'll have to avoid. Seriously, they can pop out of nowhere sometimes, it's almost like a jump scare. There's also these rock enemies that can harm Mario, but he can also use them as regular platforms. Level 2 takes place inside of a cave with a bunch of spiders, and this was one of the first levels where I discovered the bonus areas, which can have a lot of coins for you to grab. These are always neat to come across. Level 3 apparently takes place in the sky, but it's presented as an underground level. It's a little confusing. Of course, the boss here is a giant Easter Island head, and he's probably one of the easiest bosses in the game. World 4 is Kai Kingdom, the last world, and this one is based off mythical ancient China. This is made obvious by the visuals and especially the music, which is probably my favorite song in the whole game. The main enemies here are zombies? Yeah, they're straight up zombies in a fucking Mario game. What on earth? The first level takes place in a forest, while the second level is an underground level, and it's quite possibly the hardest level in the game. I had to play through Land 1 like 6 or 7 times until I finally beat it, and this level easily gave me the hardest time. This game doesn't have a save feature, so when you get a game over, you have to start all over again. And I'm pretty sure there's no continue cheat like in the original Super Mario Bros. So needless to say, World 4-2 is a bitch. But for World 4-3, the last level in the game, it's actually a little better. It ends similar to how World 2 did, but instead of shooting things in a submarine, now Mario's in a plane. It's just as fun as the submarine level, and it's not a horrible way to end the game. There's 2 bosses. First is a cloud, which is painfully easy and makes the same sheep noises like before. But after defeating the cloud, this immediately leads to the true final boss, Tatanga. And it's just a regular shoot 'em up, so just keep shooting Tatanga and dodge all his projectiles until he blows the fuck up. It's not too hard once you understand his patterns, and for a final boss, it isn't too awful. After defeating Tatanga, Mario rescues Daisy and they fly off in a rocket ship, leading to the end credits. And while the music track here is really short and just loops, I actually really like the end credits song. It's pretty sweet. After beating the game, there isn't much else to really do. After finishing it, you can unlock Expert Mode, which can offer a decent challenge. However, since this game doesn't have a save feature, this means if you beat the game and shut it off, you'll also lose Expert Mode. Huh. I honestly don't really have that much else to say about Super Mario Land 1. It's an incredibly short and pretty difficult game to get through, but it's also delightfully weird and definitely one of the most unique Mario games ever released. It's just a nice little entry in the series that you can just pop in and play through in like half an hour tops. So I'd recommend checking out this game wherever you can, either by getting the physical cartridge or by getting it digitally through the 3DS eShop, which is shutting down pretty damn soon, But in more current times, weirdly enough, when the Switch's Game Boy app was launched, it didn't include Super Mario Land. That's pretty strange considering it was a launch title with Tetris, and even that game is on the app. Oh well, I hope it gets added to the service in the future because I really think this game's weirdness deserves more attention. It's just a funny, goofy little Mario game on Game Boy. But you know what other game did launch with the Game Boy app? Not too long after the release of Mario Land 1, a sequel was put into production. However, after how different the first game came out, a decision was made to bring in team members who could make a more traditional kind of Mario game. Gunpei Yokoi would produce the game again, but that appears to be his only real involvement he had with the game. With the Metroid team out, they decided to make a Mario Land sequel that took a lot of elements from Super Mario World, which had been released at this point. The sequel would end up being titled Super Mario Land 2: 6 Golden Coins, released in late 1992. The plot for this game involves Mario going to a kingdom that he actually owns himself, and it's plainly called Mario Land. Mario discovers that while he was saving the people of Sarasaland, his kingdom was taken over by a new character, the money-hungry Wario. In his series debut, Wario not only took over Mario's land, but he's currently residing in Mario's own castle. So it's up to Mario going around recollecting the 6 golden coins, that way he can gain access back to his castle and defeat Wario, not to mention restoring his Mario land back to normal. Obviously, Wario is a major fan favorite character and would go on to appear in several future games and even spawn 2 whole game series on his own. And while the Metroid team had little to no involvement with Land 2, when it comes to Wario's actual design, he was created by Hiroji Kiyotake, and Hiroji was also the same character designer for Samus. Let's stop and really think about that. Somehow, this same artist designed one of the hottest, most attractive video game characters ever, who also has one of the baddest sex appeal I've ever laid eyes upon, and he also made Samus? That's wild. Anyways, the gameplay of Super Mario Land 2 is similar to the first game, but it actually does improve some things. First off, there's a map screen now, just like in 3 and World, though it's mostly based on World. There's 6 different zones you can find on the map, and you can actually play any of them in whatever order you'd like. The number of levels can also vary by zone, but there's even some extra levels you can find on the map that aren't zone specific too. The controls feel way better in this game compared to the first, feeling a whole lot closer to standard Mario controls and not the 0 to 100 ground speed from Land 1. Mario also has an extra ability. Land 2 incorporates his spin jump from World. In this game, you can use it by holding down after jumping, and it works pretty well. I didn't really find much use for it in this game compared to how much I'd use it in World, but it's still pretty sweet that Land 2 included it. There's 2 main power-ups that Mario can get. The Fire Flower's back to normal, sort of. When Mario picks it up, he gets a leaf on his forehead now, which thanks to the Game Boy Color's palette, looks a little bit racist now. And there's another power-up, a carrot, which can give Mario rabbit ears. When you have it, tapping the jump button over and over can let Mario glide in the air. But if you rapidly button mash, it can make you stay in the air for as long as you can. This can let you skip certain parts of levels. It's easily the most broken power-up in the game. Like, it's basically Land 2's Cape Feather. Those are the 2 main power-ups, but there's other items you can collect like the star, and some carryovers from Land 1 like how the 1-ups are still hearts. There's even a 3-up variant that you can come across. Plus, there's a new item called the Money Bag. It's a pretty simple idea. Picking it up can give Mario 50 coins at once. Obviously, this would become a very prominent item in the Mario Party games, but to my knowledge, this is the only main Mario platformer to use money bags in any way. I wonder why they didn't make them a standard thing. They didn't even put it in New Super Mario Bros. 2. What the fuck? Like, what a missed opportunity there. Graphically, this game is technically a big improvement on the first game. The character sprites are especially improved. Mario's sprite is now spot on, and the rest of the enemies look perfect too. However, there are 2 issues. For starters, Mario's sprite is a lot bigger compared to Land 1. This means there's an awful lot more screen crunch in Land 2, which I guess was a sacrifice that the developers had to make to get a more on-model Mario. It doesn't ruin the gameplay, but it definitely makes everything feel a lot zoomed in. The second issue, at least for me, is how this game handles colors. Just like the first game, despite being released before the Game Boy Color was a thing, the developers still implemented code for color palettes, meaning the game can play in color if you play it on a different model. Land 2, for the most part, handles the colorization process a lot better than Land 1 did, though this does lead to some kind of funny coloring done on certain objects, like how the Goombas are just solid blue. It's a bit wacky. Overall, this game looks pretty great for the Game Boy, but a part of me still kinda prefers the uniqueness of Land 1. Another aspect of Land 1 that I greatly prefer over Land 2 is the soundtrack. Composed by Kazumi Tataka, while it's still solid, I don't think it's anywhere near as catchy or interesting as Mario Land 1. Again, it's decent, just not one of my personal favorite Mario soundtracks. There's also still no traditional Starman theme, which is weird. They didn't even use the Can-Can theme from Land 1 either. I wonder why. But of course, since Tataka did make the soundtrack, that does mean Tataka's song is hidden somewhere. For those who don't know what that is, I greatly recommend looking into it. Basically, just about every time Kazumi Tataka composes for anything, he usually tries to slip in a little song that he made as an Easter egg. And you can find Tataka's song in Mario Land 2 after you get a game over. Basically, if you sit at the game over screen for 2.5 minutes, then the song will play. It's really cute. And again, I'd recommend looking up all the other Tataka song Easter eggs. They're always fun to come across. Like I said, because of the map screen having free range from the start, you can go to any zone you want in any order. So let's look at them. First, there's Tree Zone, which I think is a pretty solid one to start out with. It has a lot of standard elements for a first world, so it doesn't have a stupid amount of gimmicks. There were these blue owls you can use as platforms, which were cute. There's only 5 levels here, but like I said, the number of levels can vary depending on the zone. Of course, since the zone is modeled after trees, that means the boss is going to be something relating to it. The boss is a big bird that you have to jump on a few times, which thanks to the rabbit ears power-up, can be cheesed through very easily. Every time you finish a zone, you see one of the 6 golden coins returning back to Mario's castle, signifying that you're done with the zone. So I guess the next one I'll look at is Turtle Zone, the underwater zone, and there's only 3 levels. The second level was probably my favorite one because it takes place inside of a sunken submarine. I think it's a fun idea and it's a pretty decently challenging maze. The boss for this world is a giant octopus, who just like Big Bird can be defeated by jumping on his head a few times, or you can just spam the fire flower over and over again until he's dead. Strangely, I'm like 4 Mario reviews in and I somehow haven't asked just how exactly does Mario's fire power-up work underwater, but who cares. Next is Marco Zone, which is just a house with 4 levels. I didn't find anything too amazing about this zone, apart from the funny ant enemies, but it's still an alright zone. The boss here is a giant blue rat, who you just jump on a few times. Yeah, I'm starting to notice a pattern with all these bosses. Moving on, we're at Pumpkin Zone, which consists of 4 levels. Since this is obviously the spooky Halloween world, this will be where you encounter the boos, and there's also these masked ghoul enemies that bear a striking resemblance to Jason Voorhees. Not gonna lie, I was not expecting this type of imagery in a Mario game. Like, these enemies really caught me off guard. But whatever, the boss for this zone is, fittingly enough, a witch, and she's defeated in the same way as all the others. Some of you watching may be thinking, Cooper, why aren't you telling us the official names of all the bosses? That's because the Mario Wiki literally lists them as very mundane names to begin with. Like, she's literally just called Witch. I'm not sure what else to say.
She's a bitch, not a witch.
The next zone is very much the most outlandish zone in the game, the Mario Zone, which was actually the first zone I played when I was recording footage. There's only 3 levels, but this zone is pretty noteworthy for how the second level is literally placed on Mario's crotch. And not just that, but when you go to the actual level, there are balls everywhere. These motherfuckers knew what they were doing. I gotta give this zone credit for creativity. The boss here is the 3 little pigs? I guess this technically means there's 3 bosses in one fight and they can all be defeated by just jumping on them. They're not really that difficult. Spoilers, but I don't really see myself going back to play Super Mario Land 2 anytime soon. But I guess if I had to pick a favorite zone from this game, it would probably be this one for its weirdness. It automatically gets my pick for the placement of the balls level alone. Like, well done. The last main zone I'll look at is Space Zone, which is actually the shortest zone with just 2 levels. This zone has a really cool gimmick where you can use zero gravity to have higher jumps. And in level 2, it's an auto-scroller where you're gonna have to jump over and over again to dodge certain level obstacles. It's almost like an alternate version of the swimming levels. The boss for this zone might be my personal favorite just for its sake of continuity. It's Tatanga from Mario Land 1! How did he survive getting blown the hell up in the last game? Who cares? This is a cute little boss fight. I like that they brought him back, even if it's for a brief appearance. Of course, once you finish all 6 zones and get all 6 golden coins, you can finally access Mario's castle, the final level, and understandably, it's the hardest one in the game. There are 3 floors in Mario's castle, and each one is difficult in their own ways. The first floor has these weird Frieza enemies who almost look like Imperial droids ripped right out of Star Wars. They're massive and can be pretty annoying to dodge. The second floor has these Wario crushers and, more importantly, lava pits that you have to carefully maneuver over. I think this is definitely the most difficult floor in the castle. I died on this floor the most, which means yes, the third floor is actually a little bit easier. At least for me. Reaching the end of the third floor will take you to a quick mini-boss, which is some weird-ass floating face. Thankfully, it's not too difficult. So, you remember how I said it took me like 6 or 7 full playthroughs to finally beat Mario Land 1? Well, in Land 2, it took me over an hour to beat Mario's castle alone. And this ain't like the previous Mario reviews where I was playing the games on Nintendo Switch, which has both save states and rewinding. No, I was playing this shit on the Game Boy player with no save states. So I I can say from experience, this level is hard as shit. I think the worst part is that there's no checkpoints either. So every time you die in Mario's castle, you have to start from the first floor all over again. Thankfully, this game does have a save feature with 3 available slots, so getting a game over doesn't force you to play through the whole game again. That would've sucked so much. But to summarize, Mario's castle was a pain in the ass and I'm never playing it ever again. So let's talk about the final boss, Wario, who is not only massive in this game, but what the hell is that laughing sound effect? There are 3 phases to Wario's fight, and it's actually pretty neat. You're mainly just jumping on his head over and over again, but the second phase sees Wario using the bunny ear power-up, and the third phase has him using the fire flower. It's not a bad idea for a final boss, and it helps shoot up the difficulty too. Though the main issue I have with this boss fight is that if you die, not only do you have to replay the entire castle level, but you also have to redo all 3 phases of Wario again, which for my sake can be stupidly nauseating to play through over and over for a full hour. I don't know why I'm still complaining, I did beat the game after all. Upon defeating Wario, not only does he lose his hat, but he shrinks down crying, and he throws a shoe at Mario before running away. What a dick. And that's really it. Mario gets his castle back and the credits roll. And that's all there really is for me to say about Super Mario Land 2. I don't have any personal attachment to this game, but I still think it's a really solid side-scroller for the Game Boy, and I probably consider it the best Mario game on the system. But a part of me still kinda prefers Land 1 for how shorter it was, along with how much more unique it felt in comparison. Still, Land 2 was pretty good. There was never a Mario Land 3, or at least not one that starred Mario. There was Mario 3D Land, but that's a whole different can of worms that I'm not getting into. But I guess this is the part of the review where I mentioned the reason I'm cutting this off at just Lands 1 and 2 is because Mario Land 3 was the first in the Wario Land series. However, they still refer to it as Super Mario Land 3 despite it being a Wario game. Of course, the follow-ups to Wario Land would just drop Mario from the title, and it wholly became Wario's franchise, which I'll probably have to look at in a future video. You know, Wario hijacking Mario's entire Game Boy series has to be one of the most Wario things he's ever done. What a madman. So check out Super Mario Land 2 by either getting the original cart, or by getting it through the 3DS eShop, which again is closing very soon. And yes, Mario Land 2 was one of the games that was launched with the Game Boy app on Switch. The emulation is rock solid, and it's a pretty great way to play the game. But I still find it a little weird that Land 2 was made available on the app first, but not Land 1? I'm gonna guess Nintendo just went with Land 2 since it played more like a traditional Mario game. Still, I hope they add Mario Land 1 in the future, along with the rest of the Wario Land games, because why not? Why is it just Wario Land 3 at the moment? And why wasn't Wario Land 4 on the GBA app from the beginning? Whatever, at least we have WarioWare. So be sure to check out Mario Lands 1 and 2 if you haven't played them. They're very fascinating entries in the Mario franchise, and I think they're worth checking out at least once if you're a Mario fan. The next time I look at a Mario game, it'll be Super Mario World, my favorite 2D Mario game. Until then, I'll see you all in the next review, and thanks for watching.